Child marriage is a human rights abuse that destroys almost every aspect of a girl's life. And it leads, in most cases, to really heartbreaking and devastating consequences.
Elizabeth Ciders' 16 children are in foster care as she and her family face charges related to allegations of abuse and neglect. Was Elizabeth forced to get married? We're looking at forced marriages and the push to end child marriage in Ohio.
I'm not voting on it. Is that okay? No!
I'm Anjanette Levy, and this is Crime Fix.
A marriage certificate, one sheet of paper, filed in Mason County, West Virginia, dated March 31st, 2008. On it, a 15-year-old girl's signature next to an 18-year-old man's. No crime scene tape.
Elizabeth Ciders was 15 when she got married. She was just a kid, but she was a kid who was pregnant with her first child back in 2008 when she and Gary Ciders Jr., her current husband, traveled from Ohio to Mason County, West Virginia to get married. Gary and Elizabeth were married on March 31st, 2008. Elizabeth gave birth to a baby girl 2 months later, and 17 more children followed. I've told you many times that Elizabeth has been pregnant nearly every year since 2008. Gary and Elizabeth went to West Virginia to get married because legally, Elizabeth could not get married in Ohio at the age of 15. Gary was 18.
No mugshot, just ink on a government form. And that single piece of paper is the reason a house in southeast Ohio would sit undetected for 17 years while 18 children were born inside it. Here's the visual you need to hold on to for this entire video. A birth certificate and a truancy complaint, stapled together, sitting in two different county filing cabinets that never talk to each other. That gap between the paperwork, that's where this whole case lived. This is the story of Elizabeth and Gary Ciders. 16 children removed from a home on Omar Street.
That's shocking. That's shocking. Let's talk now about what you brought up. The fact that there were other 15-year-olds in the Ciders family, maybe not immediate family, but one was like a cousin or something, of Gary Sr. But there are 3 marriages in that family that we know of that involved 15-year-old girls. And I think you're right. I mean, in this day and age, 15-year-old girls, you can't drive. I mean, I think of a 15-year-old girl. I think back when I was 15, and I'm thinking to myself, you're like in 9th grade, 10th grade. Like, you got no business doing anything. You're just not mature enough to do that, even if you're pregnant. So what's the concern with that? Because, obviously, it's a crime. If you're having sex with a 14 or 15-year-old girl in the state of Ohio, it's a crime. It's unlawful sexual conduct with a minor.
Yeah, that was, extremely shocking to read Laura Bischoff's column about that, where, she's like, oh, I think I had interviewed this person years ago. It was a 48-year-old and a 14-year-old, which you talk to anybody on the street and just ask a reasonable person, do you think that's okay? And their response is absolutely not. And yeah, she was pregnant at the time. And that was some of the concern, that was, pitched privately. Well, would this avoid abortions if they can get married early?
Charges of child endangering. And underneath all of it, a legal loophole that let a pregnant 15-year-old become a legal adult in the eyes of marriage law, while remaining, in every other sense, a child.
It is absolutely a forced marriage. Globally, any marriage in which even one party or both parties are under the age of 18 is recognized as forced marriage. It doesn't matter how mature or feisty or smart that minor might be. The fact is that you do not have the full rights of adulthood, all the legal rights, until age 18. And before you have the full rights of adulthood, I'm talking about basic rights like the right to leave home if your parent is planning an unwanted wedding for you, the right to get into a domestic violence shelter, retain an attorney, bring a legal action. Before you have these basic legal rights, you cannot say no to a marriage you don't want. You just cannot protect yourself from being forced to marry. That means you cannot give full, free consent to marriage. So by definition, that is a forced marriage. And forced marriage is a form of modern slavery. So we're talking about a really horrific situation. And it doesn't matter if a minor says yes. It's like statutory rape. We recognize that if a child is too young to consent to sex, even if they say yes, it's rape. Same thing with marriage. If you're too young to consent to marriage because you don't have the legal rights of adulthood, anytime someone is married before the age of 18, it is considered a forced marriage, and that is a form of modern slavery. And that can happen to, so it's any time it's before the age of 18, but of course an adult also can be forced to marry. I was forced to marry at 19. But over there, it's a little bit more of a gray area. Was it forced? Was it not? When there's a child involved, it's just open and shut. We know that that is absolutely 100% considered a forced marriage.
Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Let's start with what's documented, and only what's documented. Gary Ciders Jr. and Christina and Gary Ciders Sr., his parents, along with Elizabeth Ciders, have all pleaded not guilty to charges related to alleged abuse and neglect involving 16 children removed from their home.
Both in the Southeast Ohio Regional Jail, charged with 16 counts of child endangering. Gary's parents, Christina Lynn Ciders and Gary Ciders Sr., face the same exact charges. They've all pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. And the investigation into what was going on in the house on Omar Street, where 16 children were rescued, is well underway. There are so many questions. Why were the children not sent to school? Why were they being hidden, as the county prosecutor has said? And why was Elizabeth marrying at 15 and then giving birth to children one after the other when she should have been in high school and going to prom? Was Elizabeth being abused? Elizabeth appears to have a bruise on her arm in the intake video. We don't know how she got that bruise. Was she a victim and didn't even know it? Her brother has said on Facebook that Elizabeth was indoctrinated into the Ciders family. But what exactly does that mean? And had West Virginia not allowed...
That's the legal status right now. Not guilty, pending trial, presumption of innocence intact. What we're examining isn't a verdict. It's a paper trail, and paper trails don't lie, even when people do. Here's the first piece of that trail. In 2008, Ohio law prohibited a 15-year-old from marrying under any circumstance. So Elizabeth and Gary crossed a state line into West Virginia, where, at that time, a 15-year-old could marry with parental permission. One county over. One different set of statutes. That's all it took. 2 months after that marriage was filed, Elizabeth gave birth to her first child. 17 more would follow. Loophole number 1. Closed on paper years later, in 2023, when West Virginia raised its marriage age to 18.
Elizabeth Ciders to marry at age 15, would this child endangering case be unfolding today? Back in 2023, West Virginia changed the state's law on marriage. Prior to that, 16 and 17-year-olds could marry with parental consent, and anyone younger than 16 could marry if a judge approved. Now you have to be 18 to get married, but the law now allows in West Virginia for a person who is 16 or 17 to get permission from parents, or they have to petition the court and affirm they're entering into a marriage voluntarily. Unchained at Last says 33 states allow some form of child marriage, meaning teens under 18 can marry. The states that have banned child marriage are in purple on this map. Other states like Ohio and Orange have strong bills pending. The other states on the map allow some form of child marriage.
Except creepy men who prey on high school girls. And it ends a human rights abuse. But legislators are refusing to vote on it. Is that okay? No!
But 2023 doesn't reach back to 2008. The damage of a legal workaround doesn't get retroactively undone just because the law eventually catches up. Loophole number 2, and this is the one still open today. In Ohio, right now, in 2026, a 17-year-old can still marry with parental consent and court approval. Not 18, 17.
18. It was illegal for her to get married in Ohio, but in West Virginia in 2008, Elizabeth could get married at 15 if her parents allowed it. Right now in Ohio, a 17-year-old girl can get married if a parent signs off on it and a court approves. There are a number of hoops that a child has to jump through to get hitched in the Buckeye State at age 17, but
A state that will not let a teenager buy a lottery ticket, sign a lease, or serve on a jury will still let that same teenager sign a marriage license. Now here's the question that should sit uncomfortably with you for the rest of this video. If a marriage license can legally erase a child's legal childhood, turn her, overnight, into someone the state no longer tracks as a minor, how many other children are currently invisible inside that exact same loophole right now? In a house you'll never hear about unless something goes catastrophically wrong first? Because that's what happened here. Once Elizabeth was married, she exited the systems designed to protect children. School enrollment records, gone. There's no indication she was tracked as a student after her marriage. Truancy complaints were filed in Galia County for 6 of the older children years later, but when officials attempted to serve those complaints, the family couldn't be located. The case was dismissed. Not resolved. Dismissed. A closed file is not the same as a solved problem. That's the phrase to hold on to. A closed file is not a solved problem. Say it back to yourself, because it's going to matter again before this video ends. Let's talk about the systems that should have intersected and didn't. 18 children were born in hospitals. That means 18 birth certificates exist somewhere in Ohio's vital records system. Tax filings, if any were made, would show claimed dependents. School enrollment databases would show, or conspicuously not show, matching student records. 3 separate government systems, all capable of cross-referencing the same basic fact. How many children does this household actually have, and where are they being educated? None of those systems were built to talk to each other. And so, for years, the state of Ohio effectively had all the pieces of this puzzle sitting in separate drawers, never assembled into a single picture. A closed file is not a solved problem.
Just this one woman getting married at 15, or I should say girl, getting married at 15. There were other members of that family that were getting married underage. And it's not good. They should be focused on other things like school, athletics, friends, networks, and things like that. And I just don't see it as a good thing at all. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I signed on to Senate Bill 341, which happened, way before this whole issue came to the forefront, is that, no, this needs to be stamped out. This really needs to become a relic of a bygone era. And frankly, if Ohio can stamp it out, and I've got all the confidence in the world that we can stomp this out in the rest of the country, where frankly there are states that you might be shocked, like California, which prides itself on being progressive, but they have no age floor in law. They do have some things saying, well, you have to have parental consent, so on and so forth, but no age minimum. California in 2026. This needs to change.
Now to the part of this story that turns a family court footnote into a human trafficking policy discussion.
Well, the federal government doesn't set a minimum age for spousal or fiancé visas. Instead, it defers to the law in the state where the couple will reside. And the law in Ohio says you can be entered into marriage at 17. So what that means is that girls age 17 in Ohio can legally be trafficked for their citizenship, dragged overseas, forced to marry an adult man who, this lucky guy, gets a visa and a path to citizenship. And also on the reverse side, men in Ohio can legally import a child bride of age 17 from any country around the world, sex traffic them to the U.S. under the guise of marriage, and it's legal because marriage at 17 is legal in Ohio. And the U.S. Senate Homeland Security Committee issued a report showing thousands of teens are being trafficked under the guise of marriage because of this loophole in federal law combined with weak state laws like the one in Ohio. And almost all of these teens being trafficked under the guise of marriage are girls married to adult men. And the way that other states have addressed this really just horrific, unconscionable legal loophole is by making the marriage age 18, no exceptions, because then we cannot traffic minors under the guise of marriage from or to your state if your marriage age is 18.
Advocacy groups tracking forced and child marriage note that federal immigration law sets no independent minimum age for a spousal or fiancé visa. It defers entirely to the marriage age law of the state where the couple will live. which means, on paper, a 17-year-old married legally in Ohio can be used to sponsor an adult spouse for a path to U.S. citizenship. Run that logic forward and it cuts both directions. An Ohio resident could, under the letter of the law, bring a 17-year-old spouse into the country from anywhere in the world. A congressional oversight committee has previously flagged exactly this mechanism, marriage used as a legal bypass around trafficking protections, as a documented vulnerability tied to weak state-level marriage age laws. That's not a hypothetical extension of the Ciders case. That's the same legal architecture operating in the same state right now, while the legislature debates whether to close it. Which brings us to Ohio Senate Bill 341, legislation currently pending that would raise the marriage age in Ohio to 18 with no exceptions.
Why?
Yeah, it's so simple. I mean, you have to wait until 18 to enter into pretty much any other contract. Marriage is a contract. So why would this be treated differently? And as I said, there is legislation pending in Ohio. SB 341 would ban child marriage. It would make the marriage age 18, no exceptions, costs nothing, harms no one, ends what the U.S. State Department calls a human rights abuse because of the devastating lifelong repercussions that marriage before 18 produces. And yet legislators in Ohio, specifically senators, have refused to vote on SB 341. This bill,
According to public hearing records, the bill cleared committee unanimously. No member of the public testified against it in multiple hearings, and it has still not received a floor vote. Compare that to neighboring states. Pennsylvania, and effectively every state to the north and east of Ohio, has already closed this loophole. Ohio has not.
when we first started realizing that child marriage was such a big problem in the United States in about 2015, child marriage was legal in all 50 states. But we've been going state by state, and to date, we've been able to help ban child marriage in 17 states and DC and 2 U.S. territories. And there is legislation pending now in Ohio so that Ohio can catch up to its neighbors, that Pennsylvania and every state going east, and north of that have banned child marriage. Ohio's being left behind and risks becoming the destination state where parents bring their kids to force them to marry after they've been raped and got pregnant.
Here's the second turning point worth sitting with. If SB 341 had already been law in Ohio at any point before 2008, the marriage that started this entire 17-year sequence of events might never have been filed anywhere. Not in Ohio, not across a state line, not on a government form that gave a pregnant 15-year-old the legal appearance of adulthood. One unfilled signature line. That's the entire counterfactual.
Same as everybody else in Ohio, just shock that this could happen, that it could fly under the radar for so long. My immediate thought at the time, talking to the press, was how in the world could you have that many children and there be no record of them? There had to have been something, whether it was tax returns, records of live birth, they have to be enrolled in school. And interestingly enough, it wasn't on child marriage. It was, all right, we need to use something like AI to get our various agencies to, flag this sort of thing, these anomalies. So, for example, if they filed a tax return claiming dependents, there were records of live birth, and yet no record of children in Ohio, that's a red flag, and that should be taken to the appropriate authorities, a set of human eyeballs. But yeah, it's just from the moment that happened to today, we're trying to figure out what we can do going forward to ensure that something like this never happens again.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up about the agencies communicating with one another, because, we've learned, all the children were born in hospitals, they have birth certificates, but what happened after that? That's the big question. Like, they were born, taken home from the hospital, and then we had truancy complaints in Galia County for 6 of the older children, and then they tried to serve the complaint, they couldn't find them, and they were gone, and then it was just dismissed. So maybe if agencies were talking more with one another and communicating better, that truancy thing could have been flagged and then been in a database, and maybe these kids would have been found earlier, right?
Oh, yeah. And this is where, I'm kind
of... A closed file is not a solved problem. and neither is a bill sitting in committee while the exact mechanism it's designed to close remains fully operational. So where does the investigation stand today? Attorneys for all 3 adult defendants have requested competency evaluations, and those evaluations have been court-ordered to be completed within 30 days of the ruling.
Attorneys for Gary Sr., Christina, and Gary Jr. have questioned whether their clients are competent to stand trial. Judge Rogers has approved requests from their attorneys for competency evaluations, so those will be conducted by an experienced forensic examiner. Now, the impact those examinations and the results will have on the case remains to be seen, but Judge Rogers said the exams needed to be conducted within 30 days. If you want to do a deep dive into the Ciders case, I have just the thing for you. We have all of the documents related to this case on our app, Law and Crime Plus. We have a lot of other case files there too for the cases that you are following. So check it out. I think you'll like it. And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.
That process will shape what happens next, whether this proceeds to trial, and on what terms. Nothing here is resolved. What's documented is the sequence: a 2008 marriage certificate, a legal gap between 2 states' laws, a series of truancy complaints that went unserved and dismissed, and 16 children who were, by the county prosecutor's own account, being kept hidden. We're not going to tell you what to conclude about guilt in this case. That's for a jury, working from evidence we don't have access to decide. What we can tell you is where the public paper trail sits right now, and where it doesn't connect. If you want to look at this yourself, start with the docket for Senate Bill 341 on the Ohio Legislature's public website. It's a matter of public record, and you can read exactly what the bill says, who testified, and where it currently sits in the process. Read it, and then answer this in the comments. Should a state be allowed to set its marriage age below the age it sets for nearly every other legal contract a person can enter? If this investigation mattered to you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to see how these loopholes actually work, subscribe to the Crime Infinity, and turn on notifications, because we'll be back with the next document, the next gap in the system, and the next case the paperwork almost let slip through.